Mueller. Who is Robert Mueller? You hear these accolades. They've built him up like they've built up Jim Comey. Does he deserve it? Robert Mueller, is he really a straight shooter? Is he really this objective G-man who's out to do good for the country? When he was appointed by Rod Rosenstein, which was really an outrageous appointment when you think about it, since Comey and Mueller are best friends, Carl Cannon, who is a reporter for Real Clear Politics. He is, in fact, the executive editor, the Washington bureau chief of Real Clear Politics. He was one of very few media types who raised a flag. And way back in May, he said, in the wake of Donald Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey, the Justice Department named Robert S. Mueller III, that would be Rosenstein who did it, as a special prosecutor to investigate possible Russian interference in the 2016 election. It was a decision greeted with a chorus of supportive croaking from inside official Washington, a.k.a. the swamp. Quote, if anyone can stay on course and not be deterred by the whims of politics, it's Bob Mueller, said former Missouri Senator and U.S. Attorney John Ashcroft. A great choice, added John McCain. Somebody we all trust, echoed California Congressman Darrell Issa. Impeccable credentials, chimed in Representative Jason Chaffetz of Utah, should be widely accepted. Democrats are even more extravagant. California Senator Dianne Feinstein said that no better person could have been named. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin tweeted, I have the highest regard for his integrity and intelligence. All this was dutifully reported in the press, which gushed over Mueller just as effusively. Quote, Robert Mueller, the special counsel America needs, intoned the New York Times editorial board. Times columnist Nicholas Kristof, revealing a lack of self-awareness worthy of Trump himself, he writes, gleefully predicted disaster for the president. Mueller is a Trump nightmare, a pro who ran the FBI for 12 years and is broadly respected in both parties in Washington for his competence and integrity, Kristof wrote. If Trump thought he was removing a thorn by firing Comey, he now faces a grove of thistles. Kristof never mentioned why he had much reason to recuse himself from his subject, as Attorney General Jeff Sessions did. I'll explain later. First, I'll say that when I heard Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein had appointed Bob Mueller as a special prosecutor, I didn't experience the same rhapsody as my Capitol compatriots. Why? 3 reasons. First, Jim Comey and Bob Mueller have a long history as professional allies. For Mueller to be brought in to investigate the behavior of the guy who sacked Comey seems a conflict of interest. Perhaps this is the wrong way to look at it, and Mueller's professionalism will supersede any personal loyalty. Okay, but here's a second reason. These two guys working in tandem have a track record of bureaucratic infighting with another Republican White House as their shared adversary that belies their reputations for being above political intrigue. This is not news. Some of the positive coverage in the last few days highlighted that episode. It's a long and complicated story, but the storyline that took hold in Washington went like this. Sorry, I'm coming down with a cold here, but we plow ahead. In March 2004, Comey, then Deputy Attorney General, sped with sirens blazing to the hospital bedside of his boss, John Ashcroft. We've talked about this, but a reminder is important. He was recovering from gallbladder surgery. At the time, the Justice Department was being pressured by White House counsel Alberto Gonzales and Chief of Staff Andrew Card to sign papers reauthorizing a secret anti-terrorism domestic surveillance program initiated after 9/11. The clock was running out and the papers had to be signed or the program would lapse. But Jim Comey, who had a dim view of the program's constitutionality, wouldn't do it. Now, he was the Deputy Attorney General at the time. When he heard Gonzales, the Attorney General, and Card, the Chief of Staff to the President, were on their way to the hospital, Comey rushed there, too, to stop them. Comey had enlisted Bob Mueller, then FBI Director, as an ally. Both men apparently told President George W. Bush privately they'd quit rather than extend the program. Here I stand, I can do no other, Comey told Bush. Yes, what's he, Florence Nightingale? What is this? That's Martin Luther's iconic line, and although in 2016 Hillary Clinton would come to see Comey as more akin to Judas than Luther, one thing is apparent. Jim Comey is a government appointee who thinks of himself in a manner many people find grandiose. Now, he wrote this back in May. Bush backed down in the face of the Comey-Mueller insurrection, but 3 years later, Comey told his dramatic Ashcroft hospital bed story in a congressional hearing that eviscerated then Attorney General Gonzales, as I say, the Attorney General at the time. Gonzales has always denied Comey's explanation of the story, you see. Always. Comey makes it like he and Mueller rushed to the rescue of the Constitution, got to Ashcroft before Gonzales and Carr did, and stopped what would have been this outrageous act by the White House, but they came to the rescue. The third and most important factor tempering my enthusiasm for the new special prosecutor, Mueller, is that Comey and Mueller badly bungled the biggest case they ever handled. They botched the investigation of the 2001 anthrax letter attacks that took 5 lives and infected 17 other people, shut down the U.S. Capitol and Washington's mail system, solidified the Bush administration's antipathy for Iraq, and eventually, when the facts finally came out, made the FBI look feckless, incompetent, and easily manipulated by outside political pressure. Now, this is the important part. This third example that he presents. It's Mueller and Comey. This, too, was an enormously complex case, but here are some facts. Despite the jihadist slogans accompanying the mailed anthrax, it had nothing to do with Saddam Hussein or any foreign element. The FBI ignored a 2002 tip from a scientific colleague of the actual anthrax killer, who turned out to be a Fort Detrick scientist named Bruce Evans Ivins. The reason is that they had quickly obsessed on an innocent man named Stephen Hatfill. The Bureau was bullied into focusing on the government scientist by Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy, whose office, along with that of Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, was targeted by an anthrax-laced letter. And the Bureau was duped into focusing on Hatfield by 2 sources. A conspiracy-minded college professor with a political agenda who'd never met Hatfield, and by that columnist for the New York Times, Nicholas Kristof, who put her conspiracy theories in the paper mill mocking the FBI for not arresting Hatfield. Would be his conspiracy theories. In truth, Hatfield was an implausible suspect from the outset. He was a virologist who never handled anthrax, which is a bacterium. Ivins, by contrast, shared ownership of anthrax patents, was diagnosed as having paranoid personality disorder, and had a habit of stalking and threatening people with anonymous letters, including the woman who provided the long-ignored tip to the FBI. So they're tipped off, this is the guy. But they say they have their guy, an innocent man. And this is Mueller, who was hands-on in this investigation, personally leading it. So what evidence did the FBI have against Hatfield? There was none. So the agency did a Hail Mary, importing 2 bloodhounds from California whose handlers claimed could sniff the scent of the killer on the anthrax-tainted letters. These dogs were shown to Hatfield, who promptly petted them. When the dogs responded favorably, their handlers told the FBI that they'd alerted, quote-unquote, on Hatfield, and then he must be the killer. Now, you'd think that any good FBI agent would have kicked these quacks in the fanny and found their dogs a good home. Or at least checked news accounts of criminal cases in California, where these same dogs have been used against defendants who've been convicted and later exonerated. As Pulitzer Prize-winning Los Angeles Times investigative reporter David Willman detailed in his authoritative book on the case, a California judge who tossed out a murder conviction based on these sketchy canines called the prosecution's dog handler as biased as any witness that this court has ever seen. And it was in the public record. And Mueller didn't even bother. And neither did Comey. Instead, Mueller, who micromanaged the anthrax case and fell in love with the dubious dog evidence, personally assured Attorney General Ashcroft and presumably President George W. Bush that in Stephen Hatfield the Bureau had its man. Comey, the Deputy Attorney General, in turn, was asked by a skeptical Deputy Secretary of Defense, Paul Wolfowitz, if Hatfield was another Richard Jewell. You remember the security guard wrongly accused of the Atlantic Olympics bombings. Comey replied that he was absolutely certain, quote unquote, they weren't making a mistake. Such certitude seems to be Comey's default position in his professional life. Mueller didn't exactly distinguish himself with contrition either. In 2008, this guy, after Ivins committed suicide, so the real perp committed suicide, as he was about to be apprehended for his crimes, and the Justice Department had formally exonerated Hatfield, the Justice Department, not the FBI, notice, and paid him $5.82 million in a legal settlement. Mueller, the FBI director, could not be bothered to walk across the street to attend the press conference announcing the case's resolution. When reporters asked him about it, Mueller was graceless. He said, I do not apologize for any aspect of the investigation, he said, adding that it would be erroneous to say there were mistakes. This is Mueller. This is Mueller. He goes on to write other things, too. The biggest case involving a chemical attack, anthrax, in the United States, an attack on the Capitol, attack on senators, 5 deaths. And Mueller and Comey were focused on an innocent man for 5 years. They virtually destroyed his life. And they've never apologized for it. He was the wrong man. They had no evidence whatsoever. They even ignored a tip by a coworker of the killer. These are the men who are now colluding and conspiring to take down our president. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
This segment to go thoroughly into a gentleman by the name of Andrew Weissman. But I want to remind you who he is as well. You get a sense for who Mueller is. You know who Comey is. I mean, they tried to put an innocent man in prison. They ruined his life. All evidence to the contrary. No evidence at all in his case. They had their man, Comey said. Even when the Deputy Secretary of Defense said, we don't have a Richard Jewell case here, he says, absolutely not. These are men whose egos are beyond description. And Mueller and Comey are best friends. And they've worked together before. They undermined Attorney General John Ashcroft. They Gonzalez. They undermined the Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, Card. And they undermined that president, not allowing him to make the decision about whether or not he wanted to go forward with a, ironically, espionage program. And you saw how Comey conducted himself as FBI director, completely out of control. How do you explain Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, under Trump, appointing Mueller as special counsel, knowing full well about the anthrax case, knowing full well that Mueller and Comey are best friends? It's appalling. What Rosenstein did is absolutely appalling. So this is Mueller, who's the head special counsel, and he picks as his number 2 this fellow Andrew Weissman, and I want to remind you who this is, because this is equally disgusting. I'll be right back.